Number three, Matt, who you got?
All right. So that was my first tier. My second tier here are two players that, if they remain at the position, I think potentially could be top five catchers. Some of this may depend on trades as well, on whether they're traded by their team. So first at number three, I have Samuel Basallo, 6'3". I don't think he's 180 anymore.
No.
2021 international signing out of the Dominican Republic, right?
Hmm.
$1.3 million. So he was valued quite highly. He's made it as high as double A. He's a hitter. He's his hit tools in the 60s, his powers in the 60s. Some people have his hit tool below the 60s, but he hasn't shown any fade there. He's somebody who has again great discipline, great eye for how hard he hits the ball. So his walk and K rates, his walk rates above 10% consistently. He has lowered his K rate to below 20%.
Hmm.
He almost had a 200 WRC plus in double A.
It's crazy.
He hits the exit velocity too, so he hits the crap out of the ball. He's his 90 percentile EV is 106. His max EVs are 112, or I think he got to 113, 114. And he's known for the bat speed. And how can you not trust the Orioles at this point too, as far as their scouting goes?
Right.
The big question with him is, where is he going to end up? Because you have the number one catcher in Major League Baseball in Rutschman. Is he going to share it? It seems like so far that Baltimore is preferring kind of having that defensive catcher come in for Adley when Adley DHs.
Hmm.
The knock on Basallo is he may outgrow the position as far as the athleticism goes. They have seen him moving to first base, but his arm, I think, is, as well as his pop times, his arm is his strength, right? So
Yep.
sometimes I question, is it really going to be first base where he goes? Do they want to take advantage of his arm? So he may, is he too good to trade? Where's Baltimore going to be at the trade deadline? Is he that prime chip that they could really get an ace pitcher for when
Mhm.
it comes to deadline? I'm sure they'll consider that given the depth that they have. So yeah, if he were catcher in the future, and we knew for sure, he would be right up there with Salas and Ford. I would probably put him number one.
Mhm. I agree. He would be, for me, it'd be a no-brainer number one, given proximity and power. Um, if he was going to stick at catcher, I don't think he will. I watched some tape of him while doing these rankings. I'd seen him previously, but I wanted to watch the players individually, like specifically. And he body type, he reminds me of Salvi Perez, right? Like he's that big and that broad. And I think Perez is just an anomaly, right? That when you're that big and you're squatting and you're up and down, as I said before, your knees, your back, like you're really putting a lot of wear and tear on your body. And if he is indeed a 35, home run annually type of hitter,
Hmm.
you don't want to put that wear and tear on his knees and his back. You want him to be an offensive player. And so in my mind, he's a first base DH. I think his arm, yes, he's got a great arm, but he doesn't have the mobility to play a corner outfield position either. So as hard as he hits the ball, you want to protect his offense. I have him listed at catcher because that's what the Orioles do, but I don't think there's that much of a chance that he stays at catcher eligible even in fantasy. It's interesting because his profile now, he is kind of that path that Garver took, right? Where Garver went from being an everyday catcher early with the Twins to now being an everyday DH who may not even catch. And I think we're seeing teams start to value the bat. If the bat is good enough at catcher, they're thinking about moving them off of catcher to preserve the bat, right? And Basayo, if they're not great defensively. And so Basayo, I think, fits that to a T. But I do see a 270 hitter with, a 360, 370 on base percentage and 30 plus home runs pretty quickly. He's that type of hitter, right? From the left side. He's the type of hitter if the Mariners, as an example, because I think he's going to develop quickly. If the Orioles wanted pitching from the Mariners could consider him and potentially, play him towards the end of the year. He's that advanced as a hitter. I just think as you said, the question is, where does he play? Kobe Mayo is probably a first baseman. Kobe Mayo has 30 home runs in his bat, right? They still have Mountcastle. You've got Basayo. You've got Rutschman. You've got Kierstad, who might be a first baseman ultimately or a DH. I think one of those guys gets moved, and probably this year for an arm. So Basayo is kind of a TBD as far as when he arrives, what position he plays, all those things. But to your point, if he was a catcher through and through, he would be the number one player on this board.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else with Basayo from you?
Not really, no. I think, and the big question for me is it just Adley, right? So right. I think that's the big question this year. Is it just Adley, or is he just not a catcher?
Right.
And I think we'll find that out if he gets traded and what the team does with him, and whether the team is not the Angels or the White Sox.
Right. Well, it's interesting too. You have Basayo and Adley in the same way that the Mariners have Raleigh and Ford, right? And you wonder about how they pair those players up. But I think Basayo and Adley is a much more difficult pairing than Ford and Raleigh is, because Raleigh's strong side is left-handed, hitting left-handed. Ford's a right-handed hitter. Ford has versatility to play elsewhere, whereas Basayo and Adley are catcher and first base, and that's about it. So who's your number 4?
My number 4 is Dalton Rushing.
I thought so.
You have him there as well, or do you have him?
I have Rushing at 5. So you put Rushing in the same tier as Basayo. Why is that?
This again is going off, he's only gotten to high A. This is going off potential and what people see in his swing and in his build. He could be that power hitting catcher. He could get you between 25 and 30 home runs. He's known for his plate discipline as well. I do like college catchers because they're going to move through very fast relatively fast compared to an early international signing or somebody like Ford out of high school. They have that experience. They have that leadership. They're ready to roll. The questions I have with Rushing is the Dodgers themselves, right? They let their players rot. They're probably just because of the way it's worked, right? You have Vargas and Bush. It was kind of surprising for me that Vargas and Bush were not identified by Tampa, but Tampa is pretty in the trade for Glasnow. Tampa's pretty well set in the infield. It is interesting that they, I always want to see who Tampa is looking at
for sure
when it comes to other people's minor leagues. So it is interesting they got DeLuca. I think DeLuca is a good sleeper in the outfield. But anyway, so what are they going to do with him? Are they going to move him? He's bigger build like Basayo. He does have the college experience though. He was Louisville top catcher there. But he is somebody that is good enough hitter to move off, right? So most scouts have him at 65 power. His K rate's higher. It's, so Basayo's under 20, he's at 24. His walk rate though is extremely high. I think he has the highest walk rate of any catcher here, even more than Ford, 18.9. Which puts his OPB over 400. His counting stats weren't that great last year, but he was injured for a lot of last year. So that's something to take into consideration. So yeah, I like him a lot. He has that OPS, OBP league type of player you want that's going to get on base a lot and hit for power at catcher. But again, I have questions. Where is he going to end up, and what's his organization going to do with him?
I have rushing at 5. My notes, I say big upside. I think he and Basayo are the two players on this list that I think are most likely to hit 30 home runs in a season. He does have a really big kind of compact uppercut left-handed swing, and that makes me a little nervous. He does hit a bunch of balls in the air. He's got that Dodgers approach. And so I do think he's not really going to be above 250 average-wise, but he draws so many walks that that won't hurt his OPS. And I think he's more likely to stay a catcher than Basayo because he is a better defensive catcher. But you do wonder with Will Smith on this team, right? What do you do? I think that, Freeman has 3 more years left on his contract, I think. And I think you see rushing move around a bit. I think you see Smith DH a bit. The presence of rushing does change my ranking of Cartaya as well. But I like rushing as a prospect. I don't have him in the same tier as Basayo or Ford because Basayo to me is just a more talented hitter. Mm-hmm. And I think he's a notch above, right? And then Ford, while I don't know that he's a better hitter than rushing, I think they're very similar as far as high OBP, 20-ish home runs, maybe more. Ford has the speed to steal 20 bases, which is hugely valuable, obviously, at the catcher position. And B, if he moves off of catcher, if rushing moves off of catcher, it's probably to first base. If Ford moves off of catcher, you might get a premium fantasy position player, meaning second base, third base, center field, something like that. And so that to me gives Ford more value as well. I like rushing a lot, but between the organization and the low batting average and not knowing where he's necessarily going to play, I can't put him up there with Basayo in the same tier myself.
Mm-hmm.
At 4, if you're done with rushing,
go for it.
I actually have Kyle Teel at 4.
Okay. Kyle
Teel was a college catcher. He's athletic. He was drafted in the teens by the Red Sox last year. He has a really pretty left-handed swing. He will stay at catcher. He's a very good athlete. He has a much lower ceiling than any of the 4 that we've talked about previously, right? He does not have the ceiling of rushing Ford, Basayo, Salas. I will say that flat out for fantasy purposes. But when you watch him play and you see the fluidity of his swing and you see the type of player he is and you see his ability to go to the opposite field playing for Boston, you see Boston's need at catcher and the fact that he's, going to be 22 this season and he could move quickly. To me, I see a close proximity, high floor catcher who has the potential to hit like 18 to 23 home runs and hit for a high average and probably a higher OPS than you would expect because of the doubles in that park for a long, long time, right? He's kind of what who was the switch hitter that they had as a catching prospect years ago?
That everybody wanted and he never get out.
Yeah. That's who Teel and so just because it's Boston, that's kind of what I think of when I think of Kyle Teel, right? And I think this is the line where that you start to draw when we're talking about dynasty catchers versus redraft. Mm-hmm. Because is Kyle Teel's peak year good enough to want to keep him on your dynasty team? Because the reality is he falls in the mix with a whole bunch of other catchers in a redraft format, right? You can find a ton of catchers who are going to hit 15 homers, hit 260 or so, right? Like, and then it's lineup where they hit in the lineup is how you determine whether you want to draft that guy or not. Does Teel have that next gear, right? Can he get to 20 home runs? Can he get to 280 instead of 260? Is he going to hit 5th instead of 8th? Can he hit 2nd, right? Like, those are the kinds of questions you have to ask with him, but he has the athleticism. And varied approach at the plate, I think, to be able to do it. And so that's why I have him at 4. I also think the path for him with Boston is much, much different than the path is for rushing with the Dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
So would I invest him in Dynasty? Probably, but not a ton of resources. But I like him as a player. In redraft, I think he is going to probably be a top 5, top 7 catcher for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you have Teal?
And by the way, it's Blake Swihart.
That's right. It was Swihart. That's funny, but that's
he was first round 26.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the high school catcher types. Yeah,
right.
Cleveland High School.
Do you have Teal in your top 5?
I have Teal at number 9.
Huh.
But I like him a lot. He's again, first round pick, great high school career. I mean, great college career, sorry. So he does have that leadership. I think he's ready to roll. There's debate on, will he come out at the end of this year, and that's quite possible.
Mm-hmm.
His K rate's under 20%, his walk rate's right up there, 18%. He had a fantastic debut, made it all the way to AA. The question for me is just, is the power thing. How much is he going to hit at Fenway as a lefty? But his hits, 55, and I think that's a little low given the discipline he shows and what he's showing so far. He is older than most of the catchers on my list, so he is going to stand out a little bit in his performance in the minors because he's more on par with the age level that he's competing against. So I like him a lot. And again, the question here is, is he going to be elite?
Right.
I think he's more of the redraft type of catcher, not necessarily the dynasty catcher you want to invest in or gamble in,
Right.
You may, he could all of a sudden break out, but that's somebody you want to draft at the end of a dynasty draft, not in the middle.
I do think that I would stay true to my rankings though, even in a dynasty format, that I would have Teal over rushing because of the floor and because when you look at, so one thing I think about catcher too is I just don't want to get burned, right? There's only a handful of elite catchers each year, but if you get stuck, playing musical chairs without a chair, and you're platooning Omar Narvaez and, Connor Wong, you're kind of screwed, right? You're really digging yourself a hole. You better have superstars at other positions if you're running that out at catcher. And so I think there is value to someone like Teal who you can count on for those kinds of stats. I look at Boston's catching this season, and currently it's Connor Wong and Reese McGuire, right? And so that to me says, unless they sign someone, which I don't think they will, that means Kyle Teal's coming quickly because there's no one else really in the organization that's going to take that spot. So again, he's my number 4. I got rushing at 5. Who's your number 6? Or who's your number?
And just one more thing about Teal. What is appealing to him is he can bat at the number 2 in that lineup. And he can play a lot of games in that lineup as well. So he could be he has the hit and the on-base percentage to be kind of that player that's going to play. And his defense is going to keep him at catcher, and his defense is going to have him play a lot.
Right.
So this is my next tier. This is like the roll the dice tier.
Sure.
At the end of a dynasty draft, because they could all of a sudden pop out. And I think one of them is already doing that. He's making it into a lot of people's top 100s. So at 5, I have an international signee out of the Dominican for $57,000, Ramon Ramirez. At 6, I have another Dodger, a 2021 international signing out of the Dominican. There's questions about where he's going to play in the Dodger thing as well, but Theron Lorenzo. And then another question, I think his build is going to keep him at catcher. 5'7", 195 is Moises Ballesteros out of the Cubs organization. So those are my 3 that I think are worth rolling the dice at the end of a draft, because they're already performing quite well, but they could be that breakout. and they offer enough offense at catcher to invest in.
So let me ask you so let's take those three as a group.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, I guess, what I might call more conventional or consensus lists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might see a Daniel Susac, right? You might see a Carter Jensen, who was a high pick of the Royals. You might see, obviously, you'll see Kevin Parada, who was I think the number 14 pick of the Mets, or 12 out of Georgia Tech. You might even see like a Blake Mitchell, right? First round draft pick of the Royals. These are, American high school, college catchers who are more conventional names, who were higher draft picks. What is it about, and you see those names much higher than a Ballesteros, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about these catching prospects for you where you're elevating them over the more conventional names?
Yeah, so they have the characteristics I like in a hitter. So starting with Ramirez, right? So this is the one I watched the most video on. He's a power all fields hitter. We don't know much about him besides the DSL performance, but he was kind of the standout at the DSL, right? So he's Kansas City 6'0", 180. He's 6'15", 2005, so he's still 18. He hasn't hit the majors yet. Scouts are putting him at a 60 hits, anywhere from 50 to 55 power. He does have a little bit of speed as well. At the DSL, 12% K rate, so he could hit contact. And again, we're considering level of competition, but again, he's only 18. 14% walk rate, 615 slug. At 18, his max EVs are in the 108s. His 90 percentiles in the 103. So he hits the crap out of the ball with contact. So, and that's the type of hitter I look for. Someone that hits the crap out of the ball with contact, but also has the eye to, his walk rate isn't like 6%. He's somebody that is selective. So yeah, I think it's worth the dice roll. And I think why have him at 5 versus Ballesteros and Lorenzo is that this is somebody scouts are even picking up on as well. Looking at his swing. I encourage anybody to go and look at the YouTubes. Some of them have collections of his pull size, center power, and his ability to hit to right field as well.
Right.
And I like right-handed catchers too. Not just the Gary Carter bias, but they're going to be saved from the dreaded platoon.
Right. So I appreciate the approach, because the reality is most of the catchers left on this list or on my list don't have much upside potential. Most of the catchers now, I would say like I said, I draw the line probably at Teal, right? Everyone else is essentially redraftable in our league, or in a dynasty league does not have the potential to give you an edge over other teams' catchers, right? Mm-hmm. So my list, I'll just go down. It's Edgar Caro at 6, switch hitter, good hitter, selective, takes walks, power is still in question, was dealt to the White Sox in the Giolito trade, 20 years old. I don't trust the Angels or the White Sox to develop anybody. And I think there's still questions about whether Carroll's going to hit. Is he going to be a decent catcher? Sure. Right. I think that can happen, but there are too many questions right now, and I don't think there's that upside talent. At 7, Jefferson Carroll, who is a plus defensive catcher, who will play for the Brewers probably this year, but his offensive upside is limited, right? Could he pop a 260 and 16 to 18 home run season? Sure. But that's redraftable in our league. And that's just kind of run of the mill in a redraft. Next, I have Blake Mitchell, 19 years old, first round pick. I think picked 8 overall by the Royals last season, 6'1", 202. Should stay at catcher, very good athlete, powerful left-handed swing, could play a corner outfield potentially, but what's his upside? Because he's strikeout prone, right? Are the Royals going to develop him, first of all? Second of all, it's a high school catcher. Thirdly, his upside is probably 250 with 20 home runs. Again, redraftable in our league. run-of-the-mill catcher in a redraft. One that I love at 9 is Ralphie Velasquez, first round pick of the Guardians. Very good hitter, bigger body, 6'3", 215, out of California, high school guy. Great pitch recognition, very, very good power. Not prodigious power, but good power. But he's got a high floor. But the question is, does he stick? Right? So he is one.
Great work too.
What's that?
Great organization too, compared to like a Mitchell or.
Sure. So he has the ability. I think he has the bat, if he stays at catcher, to move closer towards Teal, right? To move closer towards rushing. But there's huge questions as to whether he sticks, right? A lot of people see him as a first baseman now and not a catcher. So he's a name that I think is important to watch, but there's big question marks. And at 10, I had to include Diego Cartaya, mostly because we know he has huge power in the bat. We know that he has the frame and the ability to be a catcher, but he's behind rushing. He's behind Will Smith in the Dodgers organization, and he could not hit a slider last season, right? He absolutely couldn't hit a slider. He had 117 strikeouts and 354 at-bats. So about a third of the time he struck out.
He was
so
under
he looks the part.
Right?
What's that?
He was under 200.
He was. So could it be a blip? Sure. But he does not right now look like he can hit a slider. And he's behind two better hitters. And so I think the talent is there. I do think they end up moving him eventually to a different team. But he's barely on this list for me. And then I'll just run through real quickly the other guys I have that didn't make it. Kevin Parada did not make it. New York Mets first round pick. Too much of a hitch in his swing. And I think even if he does hit his potential, you're talking about 260 and 15 homers. Drew Romo you see on lists, but I think it's because of his defense, not his offense. That's one where you really have to differentiate between a fantasy list and a real life list. Carter Jensen, 20-year-old catcher in the Royals organization, has some talent, deserves to be below the top 10, but is still there. Austin Wells could be a sleeper. Very good offensive player, very good college hitter at Arizona. Left-handed swing, built for Yankee Stadium, 24 years old. I do think you might see him play a bit with the Yankees this season. Don't be surprised if he hits some home runs, on base percentage as well. And then Daniel Susac is the last one I have, first round pick of the A's a couple years ago. Pedigree, I think he was a high school quarterback that was highly recruited. His brother was a catching prospect. What's the high end potential for him? Is it Sean Murphy, right? Again, not keepable necessarily in our league and not someone that I would invest in, particularly in dynasty. So that's my list. I agree with your approach. I love that you put the IFA guys in there as opposed to kind of a more conventional list like mine. And I think it's up to the player, the fantasy manager, to pick through and find your favorites once you get below rushing, to kind of situate, is there someone, what I look for is there someone I want to invest in, right? Do I see a talent in a Blake Mitchell that others don't? Is Blake Mitchell 25 to 30 home runs like rushing and no one else sees it? Because I can get him now for nothing, right? And in a year from now, he's going to be ranked in that top 5. That's what I would be looking for with that list below 5. Anything to add for you on any of those guys? Anybody that stands out to you with those guys that I talked about?
I'd wholeheartedly agree. These are guys that I think more to keep an eye on for redraft, or if you're not keeping a catcher in a dynasty or keeper league, that could come up and all of a sudden pop up, but not necessarily be somebody you want to keep. I do like the college catchers because there's more potential for them to stick, right? So there's that aspect, and I think we've talked a lot about organization. One thing I'll say about Lorenzo with the Dodgers, he had he's only made it to single A. He's 20 years old, switch hitting catcher. But we look at hard hit rate. He was at 40.9
Mm-hmm.
And the closest you have to that is Basayo, at
Mm-hmm.
33. So he's hitting the crap out of the ball. In single A, the issue with him with a lot of Dodgers is the K. He's 27% K rate, but he is walking a lot, 16.7. But where is he going to end up, right?
Right.
With these younger type of catchers is the big question. Yeah, so and versus a Ramirez who probably is going to stick. You don't know
Right.
where he's going to end up with the Dodgers. So yeah, there's this idea of safety versus rolling the dice, but with any of these players outside of the top four, I wouldn't spend a draft pick rolling the dice in Dynasty unless it's towards the end of a draft.
Right. Well, and Lorenzo's funny because it's almost as if height becomes more of a detriment because they can
Yeah,
potentially move you off of catcher, right? So
6'3".
Lorenzo's 6'3" and listed at 195. If
Uh,
he stays 6'3", 210, and you have rushing and you have Will Smith already, they could, and his bat is good enough, they might say, you know what, we're moving you to left or we're moving you to right.
mhm.
And if he has the, at all has the mobility to do it, I'm just saying in general, not just Lorenzo, but in general.
Yeah.
Whereas like an Edgar Caro or a Harry Ford, these guys are shorter and stockier. And yes, Ford has that athleticism to do it, but Caro is basically catcher or bust, right? Because of that, because of his build. And that's something in fantasy that's actually important. It's important if you have that guy who's misshapen or, doesn't have the speed or mobility to play elsewhere, you can count on him sticking there. And that is, you could have an equivalent bat develop, right? But the guy who can move off of catcher becomes less valuable because they put him somewhere else. And the guy you kept because he's 5'10" and 215 pounds, right? Mike LaValliere is going to stay. So I think that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, and that matters a lot because if they move off catcher, you're going to have the problem of that player compared to other position players, which
Sure.
is, and I think Basayo is really the only one that could stand that test right now, and maybe
Right.
Ford because of his speed.
But even a Basayo, you move Basayo to first base, and where does he rank? Right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Does he rank? He's certainly not as valuable as he is at catcher. That's obvious. But how high does he rank? Because he's not above Freeman. He's
Mhm.
not hitting as many home runs as Alonso, right? He's not the hitter of a Vladimir Guerrero. Like it is really interesting to think about. Like, okay, so you look at this. Say Basayo hits as well as you think he can. You got Freddie Freeman. You tell me when to stop where he lands. Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson, Bryce Harper, Vladimir Guerrero, Pete Alonso, Paul Goldschmidt, Christian Walker.
And
Like
right there,
Christian Walker's
Walker,
good.
I would group him with like the Pasquatches, the Torques. I think he has a better hit tool than Torque, but kind of in that range of
Yep,
like the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
right.
And
Like
then
so here's an example. Santander qualifies as a first baseman,
Mhm.
right? Santander is a 27 to 33 home run type of guy, and he's probably going to hit 260, 270. Like that's kind of what we're talking about with Basayo. So I don't know. But as a catcher, like we said, he's number one. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting to use that exercise to evaluate, where does this player land if his bat is what I think it is, but he plays a different position. You put Harry Ford at second, and Harry Ford is probably a top 4, top 5 second baseman, right? And
Mhm.
so it is where that player lands if they're not a catcher is super duper important. Before we go, we've got 5 minutes left. Do you have a player, excuse me, within catcher that you really truly are invested in or love? Because we all have, you and I specifically have our guys that that are just our guys, right? For me, it's Tamar Johnson, obviously. It's Julio Rodriguez. It's I don't know. You have your handful. Is one of these catchers one of your guys?
Yeah, so I'm in three leagues, two dynasty, one keeper. Our main one's the keeper where Katia Pitt is. Um, I think you're named in both dynasty as well, but this is the one we're invested in.
Right.
So my two dynasties I have, I'm investing in Ford as a player, and then I do currently have him in our 15 team keeper league. The question is with Adley, would I want to keep him? Because I have players like Jackson Job at 15. That's obviously ranked a lot higher and could be a two or even a one starter.
Hmm.
So the question is, is he going to be that guy? I've obviously watched him a lot. So there is that emotional investment as well. So
Right.
I would have no problem keeping him just because it would be if he does get the multiple positions, somebody that can move in and out. If Adley ever gets hurt, he's somebody that can provide depth.
Right.
And he's a trade chip, right? So he if he performs like we think he will, he's a sure shot of a top five catcher, right?
Right.
Whereas Job, he's ranked high, but there's tons of starting pitchers. So a lot of this has to do with scarcity.
Sure. I don't have a favorite amongst this list of catchers. As I said, I draw the line somewhere before or after rushing at 5 for me. Um, I guess yeah, I love Ford too. I just don't. They're just catcher is so hard to guarantee, right?
Mhm.
There's just way too many variables uh, to get them to playing time, and whether it's the team not believing in the defense, whether it's the body outgrowing the position, it's the health. It's always something with catchers, and so I have learned the lesson with Jorge Alfaro and some of these other Uber prospects at catcher that I'll let someone else invest in catcher and try to find the veteran that is worth, like in our league, the veteran that is worth a ton, but is kind of being slept on, right? So
Well,
this year
you picked up Garver at the end of last year, right?
I did, and that's potentially a keeper for me.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. I enjoyed watching tape on a lot of these catchers. I learned a lot. I do like Teal. I think Teal has more upside than people see uh, because of path to the majors and pedigree. I love Ford. I love Salas too. I think everybody does. It's hard not to. It's the path is too long as of right now. And then Austin Wells and Ralphie Velasquez are two that I like as well. But
Would
I
you
just
draft Teal in a 15 keeper at towards the end and stick him in the minors?
no,
No.
no, I'd rather find the seventh best minor league outfielder, right, who can hit 30 home runs. Um, Anyways, this was our catcher episode. We will be back weekly with positional rankings. We'll come back next week, I assume, with first base.
Mhm.
We're also doing a more kind of open-ended fantasy conversation with two other members of our league this weekend. That should be a lot of fun as well. Matt, I miss you. I'm glad to be able to catch up and talk some more baseball. I think we got through the holidays and the craziness of December, and it's nice to be in January and just be able to let go a little bit and talk some baseball.
Oh yeah, this is an exciting period.
Right on, brother. We'll talk this weekend.
All right.
Cool. Thank you,
Take
man.
it easy.
All right.